to get everybody back online. I think I would just essentially have that we did get some consultation from the DERF, and that we'll come back to us with information point in the near future. If anybody else wants anything more, we certainly can.
Do some stretches.
Debating on if that's going to do anything.
Is it better or worse?
Yeah. Kelly. Sorry. Yes. We had been cutting those case numbers down.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
In the county, they went from the counties too.
I was just curious because that came up.
I know they had given that to us.
Okay.
Probably find that.
All right, it is 1:05, and we will go ahead and resume our regular meeting outside of executive session. Number 6 on our agenda is actually the discussion on the city manager Tom Barry's employment for the information for people watching at home or those within the media. No action was taken with inside. As we outlined within executive session, we did have consultation with North Dakota Insurance Reserve Fund, a DERF attorney, who is also going to be coming back with us with more information down the road. I would look to the rest of the council at this time for any further discussion, if so wished, regarding the executive session or moving forward. Alderman Patagula.
I just want to say that I think it was a very productive session. I wanted to thank you for your chairing it in a very appropriate and focused manner. Although it was an executive session, I don't think people should have anything to worry about. We're just trying to get more information, and I think we shouldn't be talking at this point.
Thank you. Any other discussion before moving back to our regular schedule? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and jump back to the interim government and leadership discussion actions. Alderman Janser, you had asked to make a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to share some thoughts, kind of maybe uncharacteristically for me, but and I appreciate the council listening to these comments. You know, our unanimous decision to fire the city manager last week, based on the investigation report's conclusions, has been constantly on my mind. And I'm working to repair damaged relationships by speaking directly to affected employees. No employee should have to work in a hostile, difficult situation. And those I have talked to are loyal employees and recognize that we need to move forward. I'm grateful for their desire to continue to do their jobs and to work to make things better. Several have said that they love their jobs and feel a great sense of relief and renewed enthusiasm toward work. And for that, I think we can all be grateful. I do deeply regret not suspecting or correctly understanding sooner what the investigation brought to light. And for that, I offer my heartfelt apology to employees affected, to you, fellow aldermen, and to our citizens. I've asked the HR director and city attorney to provide options to the council regarding the suspect performance reviews identified in the investigation. The uncertainty of their fairness should not be allowed to adversely affect an employee's future. Dealing with these relationships, we also need to make changes to our city organizational structure to make communications to the council more inclusive of key departmental leadership, ensuring that they can report freely to with or they don't agree with the city manager. I ask that we work on a new structure with increased council engagement, openness, and in consultation with our key employees. As relationships are repaired, restructuring is accomplished, and we take up a number of additional items in Alderman Padragula's or Alderman Wolski's memos. We all need to make sure that the city's daily business continues to get done. The essential services must go improvements and modernization of city operations that have already been initiated. I ask all of you and our city employees to work together as we grapple with additional dimensions of COVID-19 and a struggling economy in addition to our other challenges. We are certainly stronger together. I know we can continue to improve things in Minot City government and to produce the results that our citizens have every right to expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Janser. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Janser, Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Janser, I appreciate your comments. I did just want to ask if you would share your statement with our city clerk. I'm mindful that she writes as fast as she can, but it'd be important to have that in the record, please, sir. Thank you.
Certainly.
I think it is recorded online, which I thank you, Alderman Straight. On to Alderman Patagula, who had sent out the memo last week to all of the council.
If I could respond to Alderman Janser first, I wanted to thank Mark for his magnanimous and gracious comments. I appreciate the taking of responsibility. I don't think anyone anticipated this would happen, and I wanted to echo his confidence in city employees. I wanted to again apologize for whatever role I may have played in this, for not being vigilant enough, and I wanted to echo his call that we move forward. We have a lot of challenging things facing us with the coronavirus and the economic downturn, and I think we need to keep moving forward. So I really wanted to tell him very publicly that I appreciated what he said, and I thank him for his integrity and honesty. I've known Mark for quite a few decades here, and what he just said I think is in character with how I understand him and see him, and I really appreciate that, Mark. And if we didn't have the limitations on contact, I'd go over there and shake your hand. Thanks.
Alderman Patagula, did you want to continue with the memo
Yes.
out to the council?
As I was starting the process of trying to wrap my head around what happened, I wanted to focus on how we could move forward as a city. My own opinion is that our former city manager did a lot of good for us and a lot of good for our structure and organization. During the crisis that happened and is happening after his departure, I think we can learn from it, and we need to keep moving forward. And I started writing these things down just a few days afterwards to try to get some understanding of my own, and again, to try to give myself and perhaps us a more forward dimension here. I didn't intend for it to be widely disseminated, but that's okay. this is just a roadmap of the kinds of things I'm proposing that we start thinking about. Today being the starting date, I frankly would like us to be talking about these things, as Alderman Janser said. We really need to take a long, hard look at the organization of the council and how information gets filtered or not filtered, and it goes through us, and how we empower employees and how we provide safeguards to everyone involved in the process. So this was just a list of things that I was starting to come up with on April 24th that I wanted us to think about and talk about, and I wanted to kind of get out off my chest, if you will. It's not a specific set of proposals, but, well, some of them are, I guess. The one thing I didn't put in there that Alderman Janser remarked was providing employees some safety and and also mitigating our potential liability and losses. I would like us to instruct the city HR director to put together a tactful statement to put in employees' personnel files that those evaluations that were conducted under Mr. Berry's tenure are suspect. We don't know if they're reliable or accurate or not, and I don't want anyone to be hurt by them. If some future employer or the news media go into those files, I wouldn't want a very tactful kind of statement that they should be taken with caution. I'm not saying they're wrong necessarily. I'm just saying they should be taken with a grain of salt, and I'm sure Lisa, in her profession, in her field, there are ways of alerting potential readers to that, and I would like to ask her to start that process. That's the one thing I didn't put in, and I think it's very important. Making sure people don't suffer any further damages if they've already been damaged in terms of their reputations or employability.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pottergula, just as a mention, we will have an item on the regular city council meeting that will be pushed through on that agenda, so that will be brought forward on Monday.
Thank you.
Alderman Straight, did you have something for Ms. Jones?
No, I just wanted, if
please.
I could, just to interject briefly, because I'm trying to seamless movement forward. I would like to add, just for the record, and I think Alderman Padrigula is in agreement, that within the evaluation process moving forward, that clearly we need to have a 360 evaluation process that this body is going to authorize and support as part of Alderman Padrigula's request.
Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to certainly echo what Alderman Janser and Alderman Padrigula have shared. Last week, I did reach out to many of our employees and have had some wonderful communication, either through verbal communication or written communication, and I appreciate it. I've learned a lot in the last week. But in addition to that, I think that there's something that this body needs to participate in, and that is a fence mending or a healing or a better communication route with other political subdivisions and business owners, just people in our community, because I think I've had more phone calls this last week than I've had probably in the entire year. And there's things that need to be fixed, and I think it starts here. So in addition to all of the other recommendations, I think that those are things that we need to be seriously considering.
I will also, to the point of Alderman Janser, there has been a tremendous amount that I have learned, and I find myself also very much apologetic to staff, to the council, to, I think, the community in terms of not presenting, I think, myself, to being open enough for anyone to come forward if they feel that situation was so so intense that they felt that they had nowhere to go. And I think that is a big part of as we work forward. I think building up even further our human resource department to understand that the council, this body or any elected body, certainly has a strong stance behind the professionalism within human resources and the rest of the departments. I think that we have an opportunity here to make substantial growth in, I think, the ability to be more functional as a governing body. And again, I realize that there are a couple of aldermen that, as you put it, are kind of short-timers, but have been a part of change in the past. And I'm always cautious of quick knee-jerk reactions to try to fix something without thoroughly vetting them, but I think that process can begin. That process, I also feel strongly that given the nature of how long it took to find the previous city manager, and his predecessor. I don't think that that should wait, given that that 16-month timeframe prior puts us out a significant distance from having a leader while the rest of this work is going on to move forward. And certainly that's something that I'm going to look to Human Resources, and I would like maybe a potential feedback of what that would look like. And you had kind of mentioned perhaps that that might be coming in either the next meeting or the meeting after, but I certainly would like an update on what that might look like and estimated time given the 2 previous hirings that did take a significant amount of time. There's certainly, I think, a tremendous amount in Alderman Patagula's memo, Alderman Walski's memo that was delivered right before council. I think we should absolutely take all of it in and consider. And if we need a planning session right here in council chambers that is open to the public, but an opportunity to, I think, talk outside of a restrictive council form, but certainly it would be a legitimate meeting given that all of the council would be there. But I think that that is going to have to be one of the discussion items down the road for all of the different options and considerations. So Alderman Walski, unless anybody else has something specific to Alderman Patagula's at this time, I would look to Alderman Walski.
Mayor Samai, I appreciate that. Derek, I don't know if this is the moment where you try and load that up. So I prepared this, I have been thinking about this for the last week or so. Speaking to many of Alderman Patagula's points, many of Alderman Janser's points, Mayor's points, everybody's points, right? We're in this situation and we have to move forward. And so this was a quick gathering of my thoughts and some ideas. And so I just wanted to share it with the council. I was only able to get it out to everybody this morning, so I appreciate you indulging me, but that also allows me the opportunity to share it with the public, because there are some ideas that are somewhat divergent and not necessarily exactly as we have always done things. And so as I tried to clarify my thinking, I simply wanted to get a state of where we are right now. Obviously the COVID, the emergency, we are in an environment where we need to make fast decisions. We have a new council coming. We have an exceptionally difficult budget that is in the process of being built. Our team is down an important role. And as a result of the recent past, we are hurt, we are embarrassed by experiences, but we still have work that needs to be done. We don't get to take a break from this. So I attempted to structure some of my thoughts around some of these headings: lessons, challenges, questions, opportunity. Like Alderman Janser suggested, I think we, the council, absolutely moving forward need to be more engaged with the work that's going on in the city and have multiple information sources. I think that's one of the weaknesses that I've identified in the system, particularly for me, is that I think I was over-reliant on a single individual for the status quo, and I would like to see whatever comes next take a systematic approach to addressing that issue. We have had discussions going back probably all the way to last summer or beyond about the city manager's span of control in terms of him having direct management over as many as 15 people. We should address that, and I think we should address it promptly. We've talked already a little bit about our executive level employee evaluation structure. That was in the report from Ms. Munson that we need to take a look at that. But I agree completely with Alderman Janser, Alderman Patagula, Alderman Straight, everybody who has suggested that for last year's evaluations, we need to make a note, make a correction, make some action as a sign of good faith to our employees. There was a lot of discussion at last week's meeting about the executive committee, and I think one of the lessons that I've identified is that there has maybe been some uncodified authority that was extended to some members of the council more than others, and if that's a system we want to continue, then we should codify it. We should make it a part of our standing policy. If that is not something we want to continue, then let's have that discussion and make sure that we are moving forward based on clarity in this matter, because I think there are some elements of past practices that helped contribute to the environment that we got ourselves into. On a much more basic and primary assumption level, I want to ask this question, because if we look back over the last 10 years, how has the city manager role and the council manager form of government in particular been working? I do not want to introduce a giant holistic question that we, the community, have to solve at a point in time when we are down a player and we are going to work very hard just to maintain the day-to-day operations. But given we don't have this position full, this is also an appropriate time to answer some of these questions. And as I look at the turnover in the city manager position, as I look at the challenges that we have had in filling the position, I can't help but question whether we need to question the assumption that the top-heavy city manager role is either A, the best, and certainly is it the only. And I would say no on the second for sure. So no, it is not the only way we have to do this, but it may still be the best. But I think we need to be prepared to have that conversation. And what out of all of this represents an opportunity? And I appreciate the desire to give our staff stability, to give our staff clarity, and help them understand. But I want to make sure that the next council is able to put their touch on this and what we look like. And so what I'm inclined to favor and support, and I don't think any of us are prepared to make a decision here on anything today, but I do think we need to make a decision quickly. And I hope this conversation continues to Monday night. And so given those circumstances, I think we have an opportunity over the next 4 to 6 months to try something in some respects to see if it works. And we might find out very quickly one way or another whether there are ideas here or not. But what I call this is the three-legged stool. Alderman Straight alluded to it as the triumvirate idea at the close of our last regular meeting last Monday. But in essence, this splits up our span of control into a set of departments that have some intuitive connections, at least in my mind. This is not a hard and fast idea. This is all open to discussion, but if we look at the elements that are touched by the legal components of the city, that are touched by the financial components of the city, that are touched by the operational components of the city, this was how some of these departments kind of fell together as what I thought was natural or somewhat intuitive groupings. How do we solve our council engagement problem? How do we get the council more engaged with this work? I think we can look to other forms of government, which is the commission form of government that has portfolios where elected representatives have larger roles in the specific day-to-day operations and some elements of the local government or the municipal government. Again, I threw names in here because these were areas where I thought each of us, looking at our strengths, our specialties, are the areas where we seem to have added most interest over the past few years, where it seemed natural to assign 2 council members to each portfolio. You would stagger these so that you always have continuity in terms of council representation into this work. So this is, again, just a very rough structure. As this idea gets presented, it ultimately draws forth many, many questions. I do not have the answers to all of them. Here's a question. What about the library? If the attentive individuals were looking, they wouldn't have seen the library on any of those lists. But as chance has it, state law requires that the library has a board by itself. So maybe we can lean on the library board in this department to to essentially be the primary reporting structure and administrative leadership for the library. As we move forward, I know one of the concerns is who makes the final decisions. That is a very fair question. It is a legitimate question, and I don't know that I have an absolute answer to it. My hope would be that we build a system that might allow us to determine that answer, and also a system that keeps information sort of flowing on a regular basis, so that the engagement between our department heads and the council and the rest of the organization is very systematic and continuous, almost on a loop. We have elements of that already in our monthly meeting schedules, but we meet as a city council on the first and third meetings. I think oftentimes we throw curveballs at our department heads. We do things that make life difficult for them in some form, and so it's out. And I'm sure this already happens, that they get together and figure out what we told them to do, and that should be a very natural part of the process. That's also going to uncover questions that need to be answered and clarity that needs to be provided. The next week, our portfolio council members and our teams, our legal team, our financial team, our operations team, they get together, and now there's council input, again, engaged in the process in the regular city work. The next week, we come right back to city council, and there is a process by which our work is now engaged and brought forward to the full council. If there are decisions that need to be made, we are on approximately a 2-week cycle, and the process repeats itself. Again, this is just an idea. I am not married to this. I don't have any great stake in seeing this or agenda and seeing this realized. It just seems to me that it starts to address some of our issues. The hope is that after 4 to 6 months, here are a few things we might learn. Whether this organization is appropriate for a more diffused, flatter leadership hierarchy. This is a leadership model that is gaining steam in terms of newer management models, newer companies, startups, things like that. There's a lot more empowering throughout the organization as opposed to maybe the more traditional pyramid style of leadership. We would know very quickly whether these teams are an effective iteration, whether they are organized properly. I mean, the departments, the way I've laid them out, it might not make any sense, it might not work. But if we invested a little time in it, we would learn whether there's any merit here or not. We might learn whether multiple assistant manager roles might be an alternative or a valuable addition to a single city manager position. This is a question that we have already contemplated, and we're moving forward. But obviously, given the circumstances, we've been looking for a solution to this. So this might play into some of those roles. We might discover whether these portfolios actually do what we think, or what I speculate they might do. This might not work. We need to take a look at the other elements that might be included here, as to what degree the mayor would be involved. We always have to be conscious of our open meeting laws and our quorum laws, but with 2 members of a portfolio, plus engaging the mayor on a significant question, we have the ability to provide guidance into the organization, council involvement in that guidance, but we don't necessarily challenges that come with having every interaction there with the clerk, there with minutes, there with agendas. So there's just logistics associated that this might allow us to operate efficiently. And again, we're always bringing this back to council on a 2-week basis, so these issues. So that's it. I appreciate you all indulging me here. That's the end of this report. Like I said, I believe we need to make some decisions on this very quickly to provide clarity to the staff. I fully expect everybody in the audience, everybody in town who's watching and listening, please throw rocks at this idea, tear it down. I'm not invested in it. I just want us to be able to move forward quickly. And frankly, in some respects, I'm excited about the opportunity to rebuild us in a better form. I do not believe that just because we have had city managers in the past and we have worked very quickly to fill those roles when they've become vacant, I'm not sure that's working. A slight step back. and see if there are improvements that we can make to our larger system. So thank you, everybody, for indulging my time. I will be quiet now.
As discussion moves forward on this, and I would assume that that is going to take a little bit of time, but, and I would look to our city attorney here just briefly with any of the substantial changes, even if it were exploratory or temporary, that we would look at likelihood of ordinance amendments and changes, I would assume.
Mr. Mayor, depending on what the council wanted to do and how we were going to move forward, there may be some ordinance changes required.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just one.
Yes. Alderman Walski.
Thank you. The only, you're right, my assumption would be if ultimately any of this were adopted long-term, we would have probably a significant restructuring. One of the opportunities that exists is the fact that we're in a state of emergency and we have the ability, we've given ourselves the ability to do some things quickly. And so just as it exists right now, that was one of the reasons why I use the word opportunity, because we are in an environment where fast action is required. And act fast, fail fast, we might learn very quickly that this idea doesn't work. But
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I just wanted to add a little bit, because I don't think it's going to come to surprise to anyone that I like this structure in part because I look at Mr. Zakian and the stories we've been told for a long time. We have a younger population in town. Mr. Mayor, I think you and I and Mr. Walski have spent a considerable amount of time, years in fact, talking about public engagement. How do we energize the community to participate more? But more than anything, I'm trying to learn from my ultimate failures here over the last number of weeks. Granted, I know I'm not going to sit here, but I think in part it's trying to protect each and every one of this body, where we are sharing information, we are communicating in a manner. That is something that I have in the back of my mind, Mr. Mayor, and this would by no means, we want you or any future mayor to vote. It's important that you play that role in our community. You are the lead of our community. That is important. That wouldn't change, I think, in this part of the process. But with that, sir, just because we received an email from Mr. Janser, and I want to kind of touch, I can give others to touch on Mr. Walski's plan, but I want to come to an email at some point that Mr. Janser received from our former city manager, Lee Staub, and have a conversation around that as well, because I think that we should talk about some of these things today, but I think we should also vote on some of these things and just move forward quickly, sir, if that's okay with you, depending on how you feel.
Alderman Straight, I'm not, at this point, only speaking for myself, I'm not ready to vote on substantial changes without duly vetting out a lot of information for potential impact.
No, I agree with that, sir. I was meaning the former city manager reaching out in a discussion about whether or not that would be something that people wanted to entertain. That was my point, to have that conversation, because okay. I wanted to address that and talk about it, and let's vote and let's move on and be mindful of that, sir. That was my only thought.
I would look to Alderman Janser in regards to his email, and I think following that up, maybe even with our Human Resources Director in response to process and procedure of going through this. But Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think it was towards the end of last week, I received an email from former city manager Lee Staub, who is down in Colorado, where he was, or he moved to after he left Minot. He has had a couple of different employments, I believe, since then that were intended to be and were relatively short term. And he indicated that, he is willing to help us if we should desire that. I forwarded that email to, I think, all of you, as well as the Human Resources Director, and wrote Lee a brief response telling him we appreciated his reaching out, and that obviously we had things to think about and discuss before we picked a specific direction, and that, we were grateful for his offer of help. So that's where it is.
Thank you, Mr. Janser. I'd look to Ms. Junt here, Human Resource Director, as far as process procedure of this position.
Mr. Mayor and City Council, we have appointed special appointments in the past. For example, when we were without a director for the airport, we did put an interim in as a special appointment until we filled that position. I guess from my perspective, I would like to just speak from my own. I did appreciate Mr. Staub reaching out. I am seriously concerned with our employees who have had a difficult time in this issue. And I think that, in my personal opinion, Mr. Staub would provide some stability, not meant to change any direction of where the council is going, but for the main reason that our employees need some stability right now and someone that they can trust. And so from my perspective, I don't see that as a bad issue, so.
Thank you, Ms. Junt.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Wolski.
A lot entered here, and I appreciate the fact that they entered into the public discourse. I think that's healthy, that everybody in town understands that that's an idea that's being contemplated. Mr. Mayor, is it appropriate for us to take the weekend to think on these things and add this as an agenda item for Monday night for hopefully the clarity that we need to provide at this point, and ultimately, I think, some decision?
I think Alderman Wolski, it would be entirely appropriate to give it a little bit of time for discussion. I know I would like to put into actually writing my own thoughts and words regarding that rather than something that is just quickly off the cuff. I would look to our city clerk, as we would need to amend an agenda that has already been sent out, or has it?
Mr. Mayor and the rest of the council, I actually have not posted the agenda yet, so it wouldn't be amended. I would just add that to the regular agenda.
Perhaps under other discussion items towards the end would be an appropriate place. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess since I've received the email from Mr. Janser and I'm not going to be thinking off the cuff, I've already thought about it. I'll take the time and I'll think about it over the weekend. And I appreciate Lisa's comment, because that's what I think about the most. But I'm not going to be supportive of bringing back Mr. Staub, in part because Mr. Staub represents, and where his professional background is not in line, I think, with how we are operating under a pandemic. I incredibly, at this time, we have a professional staff. I look in the audience now where I come back to a lot in my discussion and my thought process is I look at Mr. Lakefield and finance in particular. I think that's incredibly important. And so as I've thought about it, I'm mindful, but I'm not looking to go back. I think we are where we are today, and unfortunately, Mr. Staub chose to leave. And as a result, he chose not to be here. And so I appreciate his response. I respect his service, but I don't think that's the direction that the community should be moving in a direction for. I mentioned the 360 evaluation and how important that is to me. I'm mindful of when I approach staff to comment prior to the city manager's contract extension. Many of them, in their professional manner, were hesitant because we did not have that in place. And that's the point where we have a professional staff that can run this city, that can move us forward. I think, to our HR director's point, we can clearly address we need some healing. We need to figure out how to move forward, respect the staff, but we have to move forward in a tactful and direct fashion to handle the city's business. And we are in a global pandemic. It is changing now. To Alderman Wolski's point, what we're going to see in 7 weeks' time when a new council comes in, Mr. Mayor, there are going to be other bodies sitting here, and I also want to respect that and respect the voters that are ultimately going to decide that. So I think that would be, in my own opinion, I don't think that would be right for the future elected officials to, if they wanted to move in that direction, and I look across at Mr. Pittner, I don't know what his experience was with our former city manager, but those are all things I've been thinking about, sir, and that's why I just want to state it publicly now, because we have this great desire to always think about it more and more and more. And I've said before, sometimes the government, we're cogs and we don't move. Our staff clearly wants some direction. I totally trust Mr. Lakefield as being our assistant city manager currently, and because of his professional background and how he comes at the current situation, sir. So those are just my thoughts.
We'll certainly have the opportunity Monday for more. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll first address Alderman Straits. I wouldn't know Lee Staub if he was sitting in the room, so I had no interaction with him. But I appreciate all the conversation we're having and the discussion we're having on this. And I think I appreciate Alderman Wolski's presentation he gave. Very clear and concise. There's aspects that I like. There's questions that I have on it, which I think is healthy and obviously warranted. Like the idea of a lesser role for a city manager or a city administrator position. At the dais, we have when I think of myself and what I have to go through to get to staff, obviously it's just a matter of emailing or contacting them, but for their information to get through a memo, to get through a city manager, to get to us, it can be somewhat of a game of telephone. At the dais, we have 6 aldermen, 1 mayor. Within that, we have an executive team comprised of a president, a vice president, and the mayor. We have a city manager. And I'm just throwing ideas out there. So this isn't how I think. This is, but in the same vein of, is a city manager role warranted or a lesser role? Is the role of a mayor warranted? Is this something where we sit up here as an equal body and we are the voice? And we have a vice president. We stick with a president and a vice president role, and that rotates and realigns every 2 years. And is the mayoral position? And this is just conjecture. This is just questions that I'm asking, and I think things that we can consider. Is there a lesser role of a city manager and more of a role of the council as a whole? Just questions and thoughts I want to put out there for us to consider. I don't think one way or the other at this point, but I do appreciate all the conversation, and I agree with Alderman Straight that right now we have Mr. Lakefield, who is very familiar with the current situation of the city and a very capable staff, and maybe that's part of the reason we got here. There's too many barriers to get to us as council members from even our own staff that put us in this position. So maybe removing some of those barriers with a president, vice president, mayor, city manager, executive team. So I don't know. And one of the questions that I had, and I'll just put it out there publicly with Alderman Wolski's, is that I like the idea of segmenting some of these departments, but however, and this is just something that comes to me immediately, is that everything's so integral, everything works together, and that would just be one question on how I would like to see how that would be addressed with all of these departments, especially coming together at a budget time, how they work together and who fights for who and who warrants dollars. I mean, that's one of the reasons we got rid of the rec department. Obviously, if they had, I try to think, I was thinking the other day, if they had projects planned during the time of a global pandemic, they're the lowest ones on the totem pole when it comes to budget time. I'm glad to see that they're part of the Parks Department now and they don't have to fight against public health and safety. So those are some of the questions that I have. Just want to put them out there. Again, no opinions at this point, but just questions.
Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I certainly do respect all of our department heads as well, and I think that they're all very capable professionals. I think we do need to hear from them before we put 4, 6, 12 months of extra responsibilities on their shoulders. We're doing this kind of week by week, but 4 to 6 months, or like you mentioned before, Mr. Mayor, it could take a long time before we can get a position filled. We need to hear from them what their comfort level is on the added responsibilities.
We can certainly engage, I think, as part of the process moving forward too, that as far as input goes in the ability to connect with the governing body, I think that should be sharply factored in as well, and not necessarily under the previous city manager or his predecessor, but I think we have enough tenure here as well to get some insight as to accessibility. Alderman Padugula.
Yeah, I want to very much keep an open mind about this. I appreciate the effort Josh has put into a very specific and yet fluid, potentially fluid, flexible arrangement. I'm certainly not ready to decide on this, but it's very intriguing. It's more intriguing and more attractive than I would have thought. Like Alderman Pittner, I have some concerns about how you decide priorities. And, I may be old-fashioned about this, but I think somebody's got to be in charge. And I think during a period of crisis, it's important to have a clear leader and a clear chain of command. On the other hand, no one says that has to be in stone. No one says that can't be fluid and different people can assume different roles. I'm going to be trying to look at what's best in terms of the city and put my own personal kinds of feelings aside. I've been a business owner for 31 years, and I've always had a very participatory style of governance. I mean, ultimately, I'm in charge. It's my practice, it's my license, it's my professional integrity that's on the line, but I rely heavily on my staff over the years. And in fact, I hesitate to talk about them as my employees. I usually refer to them as my coworker. And my personal philosophy, my coworkers, my personal philosophy, whenever I do an annual personnel evaluation, is to lead off by asking them, what can I do to be a better boss? What do you need from me to better able to do your own job? Because my assumption is that they're going to be the experts. They're doing it on a day in and day out basis. They're the professionals. And I see it as my role to enhance their functioning, to make it easier for them to do their work. They know their work better than I ever could. There is also a role for leadership. There's also a role for the modeling we serve, the ideals that we inspire and live out. So I'm going to be looking at it from that perspective, very much a participatory management style, but also a need to have some clear accountability and some clear decision-making power. I'm going to sleep on this. I'd be very interested in hearing what the staff have to say about it. Again, I think we're looking at an interim solution. It probably will take quite a while to get a new city manager, whatever the exact job description might be. But I want to be very open-minded about this, and I'll look forward very much to the start of the discussion process on Monday.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. And I agree with Alderman Patrigoula that we do need a leader. We do need someone that's head of the helm. We need a captain on the ship. And that was my intention. I've been a part of boards in the past that every year where there was an election, there was a reorganization of the council. And that was the structure that I was thinking of. Right now we have a council president. And however this would go about, and I'm not saying this is my thought or my belief that this is the way it should be. It could be something, and it would engage everyone that gets elected to not be a wallflower or just sit up at the dais. It would thrust us into possibly a leadership role and having to run meetings or be the face of the council on an annual basis if it got restructured. So just my thoughts, and I agree with you 100% that we need someone that's running the show a little bit. Whether it be at a meeting we look at the mayoral report once a month, and we see the responsibility that goes with that. I understand he ran for that position, and he welcomes that responsibility, but it's maybe would be fair to shoulder some of that responsibility on a rotational basis, just in my thought. So,
Any further discussion? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to bookend the view of the past, thanks to Mr. Janser and Mr. Staub reaching out. And I want to come back, I just want to cycle back to Alderman Olson's point of the comments that she's had with the public and the importance of also how our body interacts with the other political subdivisions in town and that role as well. And to Paul's point, and I think about it as I'm probably going to lose my whole entire summer business, just gone. But I've had employees, I think, maybe dating back to last year, I had in the 20s. But I'm fortunate that many of my employees return year after year after year, not because of probably who I am, but it's how I interacted and treated my employees. And that's why I say we have professionals in the room. I trust Mr. Lakefield and the rest of the team entirely. And I think it's how we elevate the crew, because the people in the room and our staff it's the city of Minot here. We're all in this thing together. If we can evaluate each other, clearly the voters get to evaluate us. That's the part that is, we learned something from the unfortunate reason why we're here today, but we move forward in a manner that's mindful of not just the past, but the people that are here. And I think it's hearing from our HR director and what's needed now, but continually building up our staff. As I proposed the triumvirate discussion point, I'm extremely thankful that my tenure up here has been made a great deal easier because of our staff and what they bring to the job each and every day. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm open-minded as well. I'm going to certainly take Lisa's comments to heart over the weekend, but I wanted to have the least Staub conversation, Mr. Mayor, because I was curious what you would say. So I'll give you the weekend, and thank you, sir.
Pretty good idea of where my my comments will be, but I will formulate them into a little more totality. So we will do that. If there is nothing else on our leadership discussion and actions, I would look to number 4 and, Alderman Patagula.
Just one more comment. I'm kind of in a reflective and contemplative mood. I spoke in terms of my own personal experience and how it guides me as a business person, as a professional. The other thing I was thinking about is I want to be very careful here. I'm not pushing any agenda, and we have to be a secular body, but I'm thinking back on the religious tradition I was raised in. And in the Orthodox Church, there's a very strong tradition of democracy. Parishes lead themselves, national churches lead themselves. That's a very much participatory model. And we think of religion, sometimes organized religion, as a very hierarchical thing, perhaps more so in the military even. And yet the tradition I come from is a very democratic and participatory one. And when it comes to leadership, I mean, there has to be a leader, I think. But as I've said earlier, I think that role can evolve and people can cycle into and out of it for different reasons. And there's a very important concept of first among equals, primus inter pares. The Orthodox Church doesn't have a pope. Well, I guess the Coptic one does. But a bishop is given authority and he's elected, or maybe someday she'll be elected. So one can have a hierarchical structure and still have leadership and the respect that goes with that. So again, this notion of first among equals, I think for me is something that I'll be very, very much thinking about. We all have some equality on the council. Hopefully our department heads have some equality, but sometimes people will rise to the occasion. Sometimes we'll endow them with extra authority, if you will. So that's one thing, too, that I just kind of am resonating to, just kind of free associating, I guess. But I think what's happened has really led me to do a lot of thinking, even in ways I normally wouldn't talk about publicly. But I think in some ways this is a very good thing and a very good opportunity that we have, and I want us to make the best of it.
Seeing nothing more, I would move to number 4, the request to staff to provide a list of ongoing activities. Alderman Walski, I believe that you had asked that this be added.
I did.
Perhaps a little clarification.
I did, Mayor, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide that clarification. I think in light of the larger circumstances, we're going to have to get a little smaller, and we're going to have to consider some of the things that we have been doing, probably pull back from others, and really prioritize everybody's time and energy and capacity over the next few months. And so my request was that staff, our department heads, kind of begin putting together this list so this can be brought back to us. I don't know if it's if Monday night is probably too soon, but probably certainly the 2nd May meeting, so that we can have a sense of what you guys are working on, and if capacity issues are an issue, maybe we can help you narrow some of those things down a little bit and focus on what's really the highest priorities right now. So nothing urgent here, just I feel like it's important for us to get a picture of the whole organization right now.
And with that, also with discussion that's likely going to be coming up on Monday to some great extent, I would anticipate. Looking out to our staff and to the council itself here, there's a lot of things that we're moving that are sitting on pause right now. We're very aware that there is a next legislative session coming up that is going to have significant implications. I think that is something that we as a body do have to tackle, along with our finance director and interim city manager here, seeing as our crystal ball is still pretty cloudy, and we're going to have a hard look at what that one specific item in the legislature is going to mean for us financially, but more so to make sure that doesn't get lost in the interim, and start having that conversation with with our consultant, Mr. Shane Gettle. Because we cannot allow that component to slip off the radar even for a month. We can't afford to lose that. So with that, I do look forward to seeing some of those activities and if need be, help push those along wherever needed. So we'll look for that here in the next 30 days, perhaps from staff, for some comprehensive idea and look and see what we have. Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I have to confess I wasn't quite sure what this item really was going to be, and I appreciate the thought. I guess I would just say that I would have maybe framed it a little differently. I would have maybe framed it as, to the staff, what do you need help with from us, or what do you need relief from?
Yeah.
Because this looks to me like just giving them another list to build, and I think we have to be clear that that's not the intent. I mean, we have good general knowledge of the stuff that's going on, but I think what we're really trying to get to is, yes, we're in kind of crisis mode. We're short a player. So what can we do about that? What do you need help with? And what do you need relief from? Because there's probably some stuff that can fall off the bottom. And I guess that's just my thought.
Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, I appreciate the sentiment, and I did have some of this conversation with a few of the members in the past week. Some of the questions that came up is if we should push back some of our go-live dates on our software projects or some of those types of things. And in particular with our finance software project, our go-live dates were structured around our other work that we do in the finance department. So we picked October because that was kind of the sweet spot to get that new software up and running and go live prior to year end. And then, going live with payroll at the beginning of the year. We have year end, then we do our audit, then we're right back into budget cycle. So October is kind of our sweet spot for our go live and our major portion of that. So some of these things, we're still on track, but it's a lot probably more cumbersome to try to move those deadlines than it is to stay the course. And we are way overdue for some of these technology upgrades. So we're all eagerly anticipating the advantages that we will see when we go live with these. We do continue to prioritize projects, obviously. We've had a couple of them here in the last couple of weeks now that are being pushed off and freed up some time and resources. And we'll continue to evaluate what we have and other resources that we need. But right now, I think we're just managing what we have and trying to stay the course. And the staff is doing a great job and working diligently to pick up the pieces.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield, and I'm sure we'll get a little bit of an update on Monday as well for the city manager's report. Alderman Patagula.
I wanted to very strongly reinforce, strongly reinforce what Mark was saying here. I mean, that's how I would look at this, not just a report or not a report at all, but a sense of, where are you at? What do you need help with? I'd leave it up to you. I think that the finance reporting system needs to be made live as soon as possible. But I think to me, it's a more general question of, where are you at? What are the things that maybe you've been doing or told to do that really don't make any sense to you anymore, or that we need to put off for 6 months till the economy stabilizes, or we have a sense of how bad it's going to get, or what the coronavirus is going to do or not do. We've had, in some ways, a very strong, perhaps autocratic leader. And Mr. Staub is an engineer, Mr. Barry was a geologist, technocrat, whatever. Maybe it's time to pay attention more to, quote, the soft side, close quote, of management and leadership, to look more at people's feelings, their emotion, they're at. And that's something I publicly and privately talked about often with the former city manager. Let's make sure you don't put too much on your plate. I know you're hardworking. I know you're capable. I know you want to please. But everybody has limits. And I want to make sure that we haven't inadvertently been pushed into things or kind of felt like we had to do something, where maybe now this is the time to step back a little, because everybody's going to be challenged. Everybody is challenged right now because of the world environment and our municipal environment. So I think that's how I would look at it, very much like Mark said. Are we doing some things that we don't need to be doing? Or is there something out there we really maybe need to be paying attention to that we haven't? We need to, I think, take a step back and take a look, not present some report, but give us a sense of, where you're at. And if everything's fine, great. That'd be nice to hear. It'd be nice to hear that reassurance. But just, kind of my warning from my professional background, it catches up with all of us, no matter how hard we work. I appreciate your memo to the city staff at 7:14 last night or the night before. Great job. Personally, be careful about doing that. I get in the same trap too. I was up at 4:30 this morning and I was writing memos. So, but it's something we need to be cautious about. So that's what I would advocate, I would lobby for, is more of a softer touch in terms of management, and really using this as an opportunity to step back and maybe we need to ditch some things for a while, not forever, but for a while. Maybe we need to reprioritize, because when it's a top-down structure, when you're told what you have to do or what goals you have to accomplish or what metrics you should have. I'm not real comfortable with that, especially, with what's happened. I think it should come from the bottom up, if you will. Again, our line staff are the experts. They're doing it day in and day out, and I want to make sure they get adequate attention, particularly from us, and then not just get funneled through someone or someone, direct. I see it more as a participatory, kind of mutual engagement model. So I want to very, very strongly reinforce what Mark has said.
Alderman Wolski.
As the drafter of this agenda item language, I want to suggest that Alderman Potragula, Alderman Janser are exactly right. This is an attempt to get a sense of, yes, Alderman Potragula, yes, Alderman Janser. So I just wanted to affirm that they are, what they are saying is in alignment with my intention behind putting this on our agenda. And I think we are at one of those moments where we need to chill out a little bit, relax a little bit, and take some of the foot off the gas on some of these things. And so I want a sense of what that might look like, I guess.
Mr. Mayor, if I can make a
Please.
comment here, and I apologize for dragging this out a little bit.
By all means.
I appreciate the questions here, and we will bring this information back. I think all of the department heads here were extremely fortunate. We have a talented, capable group, but that isn't just the department heads. It's also, we have a deep bench here. We've had a lot of people step up, and I just want to give an example. Over the weekend here, when the little boy was lost, they were searching for him, and it's the worst comes to mind. And I got a couple text messages. The fire department, the fire chief, had texted that they were out sending a dive team out to begin a search, and and just asked if they let us know if they need anything. And the police chief also advised me that they were starting to do a search. So later on, he reached out. They wanted some maps printed for begin grid searching so they could organize this search. So I reached out to Lance to find somebody that could start those maps, and that's my involvement in that. They were the experts at the scene. We get them the resources they need. They carried it out. It was a good resolution to the situation, but everybody participated. We got the right resources, and we got the right outcome. And I think that's going to be our approach. We have professionals, and we'll let them do that job. We'll kind of keep everybody moving in the same direction, and make sure that we're doing the right things and do the right approach. We have a department head meeting scheduled for here in
5
a
minutes
little bit. And part of our hope for doing that is we had a department head meeting last week so we could discuss some of this, clear the air a little bit, and hopefully get a little bit unified in our direction. And there was some good discussion. We weren't all unified at the conclusion of that meeting, which isn't a terrible outcome. We did agree that we should meet again, and my hope was today that we would have some direction, and we were going to discuss that and as a group figure out what we need to do to best implement that. And I think our city attorney had some good words here in the last couple of weeks that we've all learned from this, and there's things that we could all have done better, and that's on every aspect of involvement in this. So I think that's our focus, that we are all going to try to do a better job and get this thing moving the right way.
We could, thank you, Mr. Lakefield. I greatly appreciate that. We could certainly sit here for hours and talk lots. Is there anything else pertinent to today that needs to be addressed prior to our city council meeting coming up on Monday, specific to the activities and/or priorities? Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make it brief, but I'm going to work a little harder if I can to get my staff questions answered in advance, because I recognize that nobody wants these long meetings anymore, and I'm mindful of that for staff in particular. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The one thought that I have in looking at the need to move forward is to, in some fashion, prioritize a little bit, in the sense that, when I read Alderman Padregula's memo, I mean, there's so much there.
Sorry.
And it probably all has a need to be addressed, but I think somehow to come out of that, and now with Alderman Wolski's document, clearly a look at some short-term and then longer-term reorganization is one of the things. I think addressing the executive committee and what that is or isn't. Some of those things we can kind of pick off and probably deal with, and then there's maybe some other things that are farther down the line. And so I think somehow sort of transforming what we have into either like with some priorities or kind of a work plan to take off in consecutive pieces is desirable. And I don't know how we do that exactly, but I think it would make for a good way to go at it.
Seeing nothing else, that takes us to our final item on the agenda, adjournment.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Wolski, second by Alderman Pittner. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.